Welcome to Trailer Rewind, a monthly conversation about movies you may have missed in theaters that are now available to watch at home on streaming services. Every month we dig into the archives and watch a film that was one of the trailer picks on a Saturday matinee episode. You can get access to the SatMat show over at patreon.com/thenextreel. It's a great way to get an overview of everything that we do here at The Next Reel. Today we're talking about Jonathan, which is the first feature film from writer-director Bill Oliver. His previous credits were shorts, and this is also the first feature film for the two other credited writers, Gregory Davis and Peter Nikowitz, and they have each previously written a short. Each of those shorts was also directed by Bill Oliver, so this is a creative team that has worked together before. This is my trailer pick, actually, from October 13th, 2018.
Nice. Wait, is this your first trailer pick that we've made into Trailer Rewind?
It's
close. If there's been one before, I just didn't notice, because that's kind of a special thing. It may have been
Hostels. I can't remember. I'd have to go back
and
look if that was one of mine.
Well, this is better than Hostels. Come on.
Well, yes.
That's why I don't remember it.
This is one that I think I seeded into the trailer picks thinking this is something JJ's going to want to talk about.
That's the thing. See, that's why I'm highlighting this, because now if we've approached your trailer pick selections, we now can kind of we're the puppet master, right? We can manipulate the process to make sure that we get good movies to watch.
Yes, we've been working on getting there. Yes. We've got some good stuff. So today's June 11th, and Jonathan is available on Netflix and Hoopla. So Hoopla is a digital streaming service that is you can usually gain access through your public library. So Canopy is one that you can do. Yes,
Canopy
and there's also
Hoopla
Digital, and depending on your public library system, you may have one or both of those available to you. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I watched this on
Well, this was an interesting one to research. Jonathan had a very, very limited theatrical release. Based on the information that I could find, it was released into theaters on November 16th, 2018, but only in Russia, where it made $52,923 in its international release. It was simultaneously released directly on digital services here in the United States. So on November 16th, you could go to iTunes or Vudu or Movies Anywhere, whatever your digital locker service is for movies, and purchase it there. It became available on DVD and Blu-ray in the United States and Canada on January 15th, 2019. And this was one of those films that it feels like it got burned, dumped, or whatever hole in the ground analogy you want to use. It just didn't see the light of day out there. And it became available on Netflix April 16th, 2019. So very short turnaround from digital release to hitting Netflix. Back in October, when Pete and I talked about this on the SatMat, I said that I was excited about this potential mind-bender story that could be in here, but I was cautious about how it was going to resolve that story. It just had this feel of, well, it could go with a conventional route that might be a little disappointing. It could do something a little bit more unique, but in a small film like this, how well would that be executed? Was that a reason why it wasn't, finding distribution? Pete said, this looks like a reverse Gattaca.
Okay.
He wanted to know, he was curious about which of them is responsible for going to the bathroom, because I guess that's Pete's primary concern is body functions. But he did say he was excited about it, and he loved the cast in this. We've got Ansel Elgort, choosing some interesting properties, making a distance from those, the Divergent series, those sort of teen YA things, and approaching a different type of story. So he was really intrigued by that. We also he mentioned Patricia Clarkson, Matt Bomer, and Suki Waterhouse in the cast for this one. We have a very, very small cast, but some recognizable faces and names for this one. So to get started, we have the setup, which is we have two personalities in a single body. So JJ, if there were two of you living in your body, what would their two names be?
Well, that question is pretty awesome, because I kind of Well, I don't have two personalities, but I do kind of have the two names, right? And I don't think I've ever mentioned this on the podcast, but, I have JJ and then I have Justin. And people always tend to ask me, they say, which do you prefer? And it's hard to say because I'm comfortable with both. But what I do get, and this could be an interesting thing to think about in the context of this movie, is when someone from a Justin world calls me JJ or someone from a JJ world calls me Justin, I get a little twinge of intimacy where I'm like, oh, you know me and my other brother's personality. No, that's too much of a metaphor, but really, no, but the twinge of intimacy is there. It's like, you know me a little bit better because you know both sides of me, which I think is really interesting when you consider what this is in this movie, which, Ansel Elgort does a really interesting job of playing the two characters. But when I went along in this movie, I really felt like the movie wasn't even necessarily about him as an actor or as either of the characters. It was really just a conceptual piece about this interesting sort of Black Mirror style idea.
So what is the Black Mirror style idea? Because that's one of my first questions was, is this sort of a soft sci-fi film to it? Is that what?
Well, you know what? I guess I should have done research to find out if this is actually a thing that's out there. I mean, he presents, Jonathan, one of Ansel Elgort's personalities, presents Elena with it looks like, what is it? Popular science or something to explain, or Psychology Today to explain what's going on with him in this dual consciousness, one body thing. So if it's a real thing, then maybe it's not Black Mirror. And if so, then wow, what an interesting story. But I think it feels sci-fi because he has the monitor in the rear of his earlobe to time out the different consciousnesses taking control of the body. So that feels very sci-fi to me. And the way it's presented in this sort of cut up storytelling, I think gives me the feel of something that's Black Mirror too. I left the captions on for the entire film. And anytime there was any music playing, the caption would come up and say foreboding music or sullen music, right? It had all these things. So I don't know if I actually would have felt that way, but I definitely got the feeling that they were trying to set me up for a Black Mirror style thing when I watched this movie.
As I thought about this film after it finished, over the past few days, I started to come back to thinking about what this film is really trying to say, because it is much more of a character piece. And so I started with, that I love sci-fi films that it's not a lot of special effects. It's taking a concept that maybe is briefly grounded in reality and then pushing it maybe 5 years out. I mean, we don't have a sense of specific time or place. We don't have a year. We look at the technology that's available. It gives us, it's contemporary because there's cell phones. But it could be, be several years out. So we have that sci-fi element where we're pushing just past the limits of what's possible today. And that gives us the ability to do some interesting things, tell some interesting stories. And so I thought, well, is this film really more a commentary about the different people that we are in different social circles, as you sort of touched on with your Justin and JJ, and what happens when those worlds collide?
Sure.
Is it? Is that what we're getting at here? Because we have two very separate personalities. And now we have just Jonathan's point of view primarily. He's our sort of through line. We're going to identify with him because we follow his story. John, we only get in the video diaries that they provide for each other. And so to sort of get us through this, I thought we'd sort of move through the different phases of this story. And we start with just giving us the routine in Jonathan's life, goes to work, comes home, goes to sleep. We get a lot of clocks in here early on to get a sense of this routine. He gets up at 7:00. He has to leave work at 1:30 because he has to be in bed at 3, and then he goes to sleep. He wakes up at 7 a.m. He watches the video from John, and we get this sense of this very strict routine in his life. But we early on get this mystery with Jonathan trying to figure out what John is doing at night. And it's triggered by finding as Jonathan's doing the laundry, a napkin from a bar. And John hasn't mentioned anything about going out to a bar. And in the early video diaries, we get the sense that Jonathan is your straight-laced, by the book, by the rules kind of guy, and John is a little bit more of the wild child. He's much more relaxed. His hair isn't as neatly combed as Jonathan's is. So we get in costume and the difference between the two. Jonathan's, collared shirt tucked into his khaki pants, and John's a little bit more, he'll throw on whatever's there. And Jonathan often mentions that John's not keeping up on his chores, but we get this, doesn't do the laundry. You're right. But so we get this mystery that's the first sort of direction of where the story's going to go. What are we going to do with these two characters? We're 10 or so minutes into the film. What can we do with the setup? Well, we get this mystery. What's going on with John at night? And that's where we get Matt Bomer's character introduced, who is a detective that Jonathan hires to follow John at night.
And Matt Bomer thinks that he's following himself.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Because as he explains it, you're both the client and the mark.
Yes, exactly. And this is the first circumstance of an outsider. Really, we see how Jonathan has to sort of conceal his true nature of what's going on, of these dual personalities in a single body, and how he has to talk around that. Because nobody at work knows this. He's got the story of a sick relative. That's why he has to leave work early. There's no outsiders understand what's going on, but we have this detective that's now trying to gain some insight into what's going on, which puts Jonathan in a sort of awkward situation trying to explain why he would hire somebody to follow himself. But where did you think the story was going there? I mean, was that a mystery that was intriguing to you at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I bring up the Black Mirror comparison, because the one thing that I really ended up liking about this movie, but tripped me up the whole way through, was because both, and this is of course natural to the movie, but because both brothers are being played by Ansel Elgort, every time he wakes up and every time we get the new Flash, I always assume that we're going to see John. Yes, meaning the other character. I always feel like we're going to get it, and they have a lot of clever little mechanisms to show that that's not going to happen. Right? Jonathan sleeps in one bed, John sleeps in the other bed. All these things, but it was disorienting to my brain in a way that I ended up liking in a meta way about the whole story, because that whole mystery of what is happening and what is this other person and why does it matter? Because that's the other piece too, is that we're not given the rules that they live by until really the third act, I think. So the story is told in a way that allows us to find out with the main character, the straight-laced brother. And I think it's done effectively, and it's a really creative way to show it. Yeah, it creates some nice tension when we're constantly denied access to what's going on with John. He becomes I wanted it. Every time he woke up, I'm like, oh, great, we get to hear John's side of the story.
Well, he's set up as an unreliable narrator early on, because he talks about going out with his friend, but he doesn't, he said, oh, we went out for pizza or something, but then we find the napkin from the bar, and then that triggers this, what's he hiding from me? There's this trust, you would think, between these two brothers, particularly when you're occupying the same body, and you get that sense from Jonathan of, well, what's he doing at night? Because we understand there's repercussions because they have to communicate with each other. Early on, we see Jonathan helping a woman in the apartment complex, and he tells John, oh, by the way, I bumped into so-and-so. I helped her with her groceries. That's why she's nice to you. So they have to communicate about their interactions. And when John starts leaving details out, that sets us as an audience on edge. It creates some tension with Jonathan of, okay, what's going on? What are the consequences? What are going to be the repercussions that Jonathan's going to have to deal with based on the decisions?
Right, and why?
Yes.
Why would it? Yeah. Why would it be a thing? Right. Like, we need to learn the whole thing about their situation, and it's done in a very progressive and clever way. So that takes us into what the root of that sort of mystery is, which is Elena, which is the girl that John is seeing, which we find out from the detective, and then Jonathan starts following her during the day, and our sort of initial bit of conflict is Jonathan bumps into Elena. She thinks it's John. So, of course, that night, we learn she talks to John about it. And in John's diary response to Jonathan, he's furious
because it's, breaking one of the rules. But Jonathan now has withheld information from John. So now John's got to, lie to Elena, puts him in an awkward and uncomfortable situation. So we get a little flip here, which I thought was very clever, because we think that John is going to be putting Jonathan in an awkward situation, but now Jonathan is the one that's actually turned the tables on John unintentionally.
And that is difficult to follow even in the movie, because there's so much chicanery going on.
Oh, yes.
That there isn't really a protagonist. And then, of course, it's set up by the same actor. So that's something that's difficult to tell, but you feel the stress, you feel the drama of it while they're telling you the story of each of these brothers who share the same body lying to each other.
Yes. And this is where we get the first use of really relying heavily on those video diaries, where our sense of time for me gets shifted a little bit, because we have to remember that each time we get the conversation back and forth, it's an entire day that has passed. And so we get the sequence where it's the back and forth between the two of them arguing about some things. And you're thinking, okay, well, that's the amount of time that's going in between each of these things. But for them, the way it's edited together, and for us, it's this back and forth, argument. Because we lose, the time at work, sleeping, all of that. We're just getting, the cuts back and forth, which
every 12 hours.
Yes. Which, how is that for you as a storytelling device? Did that work for you? We get the performance, and it's going to rely heavily on the actor's performance, but I thought that's not something that I recall recently in a film, of where we've got a recorded conversation that we've got to cut back and forth between, to help move things forward.
I generally liked it, but it definitely makes the film small, right?
Yes.
I mean, and that's something, and I don't say that as a negative. It just makes it makes sense to me when you tell me that Mr. Oliver has only done shorts before, because it feels like a creative idea that can be explored in a short. And I love that it's exploded into this feature film length here. But in general, it binds the movie in a way that leaves it to this kind of tiny universe. And I think that's really why you get the things that you get about this film having limited release and not people knowing it and not making a lot of money. It's a great concept, but it really is a short story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Put on screen. So I didn't dislike it, but it does get it becomes simpler as the movie goes on, because it becomes a limiting plot device, which again is both the movie's strength and its limit when we look at it.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, being limiting, because it then goes away, because John stops communicating with Jonathan. They get in this fight because, the Elena thing, or I think even before John knows about Elena. I'm trying to remember the timeline and everything, but for a good while, there's an argument between the two of them. John just stops communicating, and that leaves us with Jonathan and Elena and this new romance that's going between the two of them, which is really kind of odd and creepy if you think about it, because he's tried to explain to her the whole
explainable.
Yeah, he's tried to explain the nature of who he is, and gave her the article, and she then eventually does read it, and she then becomes sort of the audience surrogate that gives him the opportunity to explain how we get to that point with this device, and when they were an infant and all of that, and the doctor, and we get the whole setup and explanation of how he gets to function at this point, because he's got to explain it to Elena. But if you think about it, she knows one personality, and we know they're quite different people and personalities, but now she's with Jonathan for a good middle part of this film is their relationship together. And John has just withdrawn. He even quits his job. We find out he then takes a job as like a security guard at night, as opposed to being, working in a law firm. But it's a very much a tonal shift for me from, it's the mystery of figuring out what Jonathan's up to now, this love story between Jonathan and Elena, which again,
and you asked if this is an exploration of different personalities in different social circles. At this point in Act 2, it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like potentially some sort of maybe an idea about mental illness and loving two sides of the personality of one person, and how you deal with that in society. One of the things that I thought that I was kind of yearning for in the second act is I really wanted the communication lines to open and for Elena to actually spend time with John and Jonathan and unite the characters and deal with what that meant. But again, because of this, this device, this vehicle, this tool that they're using to tell the story, it doesn't work that way. And that, again, keeps the story kind of small. I do want to mention, because I looked this up on, that bastion of earthly knowledge, Wikipedia. It says, dual consciousness is a theoretical concept in neuroscience. Theoretical, keyword there. It is proposed that it is possible that a person may develop two separate conscious entities within their one brain after undergoing a corpus colostomy. And it goes on to detail to describe what that is and why someone might do that. But I guess the key thing is that this is a creative leap about a theoretical concept with an idea that, twins or multiple beings grew up in the same body. So it is science fiction to that degree.
Interesting. Well, and as we get further into the story, as John has withdrawn and starts to become depressed, he's now isolating himself. Jonathan's waking up in places that are not home.
Didn't he wake up in like a drug bordello at some point?
Yes, he did.
Ooh.
Yes.
Creepy.
That's when we find out that there was even more to their background and that there was at one point a third brother that was in this body.
What would the third brother be named?
Probably
John, Jonathan, and
Johnny.
Johnny. And Johnny was removed, which is the word they use to say a consciousness that is killed, removed at age 9. Is that correct?
I believe that's I think it was around age 9. Yes.
John, Jonathan, and Johnny.
Yes.
Yep. I think you're right.
So which is interesting as far as storytelling point, because now we've set up that John is depressed.
Now you've got stakes.
Yes, we've got some stakes, and we know it's possible
people can be removed.
People can be removed, and so we've got this possibility of, will the doctor remove John? What is that going to do to Jonathan? Because we've seen when John withdrew and stopped communicating, the impact that had on Jonathan of losing, his other half, his brother. I mean, it's the one constant in his life, because according to the rules that they've set up, he's got to have barriers between himself and others. He can't enter into relationships. That's against the rules. So he's risking losing, his closest friend at this point. And this is where we see less and less of John, or he's doing more dangerous things. And then that transitions into, we start seeing points where the time is shifting. Jonathan is waking up later and later, 7:01, 7:02, 7:03. There's some drift in the timer. But that's where the doctor, played by Patricia Clarkson, reveals that, no, it's not the timer that's causing the drift. It's that John is starting to push in to Jonathan's time. And we start getting these episodes.
And not on purpose.
Right.
Is a key point in that, too. It's just the natural progression of their condition.
Right. It's suddenly, we've got moments where it's during Jonathan's time. He's in the grocery store shopping, and suddenly John has pushed through, and for him, he experiences it as a blackout. We get these brief, black screen.
And the way they shoot that is awesome.
Of the just black and then cut back.
Dead space, black and silence for not long, but long enough that when it flashes back, you are immediately disoriented.
Yes.
You immediately take the position of what just happened, and it really puts you directly into the position of Jonathan, awakening for the first time again in a place that he shouldn't have. And then when they take it to the next level, it becomes really interesting when they are fighting with each other.
Okay, so talk about that a little bit more, about that fight, because it's a really striking sequence.
Confusion.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's this huge confusion where, the doctor, Patricia Clarkson, believes that, and everyone believes that John is depressed because Jonathan made him break up with Helena, and then all these things go south in his life, and he wants to be removed, and he starts having really self-destructive behaviors. And kind of holding the Jonathan character at hostage for them, even threatening multiple ways to commit suicide, even attempts at one time by cutting himself. And then they get into this kind of, it felt to me like a rapid fire sequence where Jonathan keeps losing time. And of course, Jonathan's our narrator. Jonathan is our point of reference. So that's all we have. But it comes into this really interesting scene, which we can't really play for you on the podcast because it's just clips back and forth. But it's the concept of you're with Jonathan and he loses time and he's on the top of a building, and then he loses time again and he's chasing down the stairs, and it's back and forth as the two consciousnesses are fighting each other for control. But again, we only have the one side of the story. And I think I really liked, again, as a plot device, I thought it was a really interesting way to watch this story play out.
Well, particularly since Jonathan has, knows that John may try to hurt himself. And he's got, a recording from John saying, at some point in the future, he's going to jump off this bridge. So, Jonathan, to keep himself safe, his physical body safe, at night when it's going to be John's turn, he's, basically, handcuffs himself to the bed. And so that when he starts having these flashes, when John's pushing it, he's trying to get back to that so that he can secure sort of the body into a safe place. But before he can get that done, we get the black, and then like the camera and the apartment are trashed. And that's when it starts, he's up on the roof, and it's like every single time it's like he's getting closer to the edge each time he wakes up, and then he'll run back down the stairs and then he's back up on the roof. And it's this,
terrifying.
It's the only sort of direct physical conflict interaction we can have with this character is sort of their fight over the body and where it's going to be, which is, based on the story we have is, we can't have them come to physical blows with each other. It's not going to be a Fight Club thing where we're beating ourselves up, but it's going to be, this tug of war with the body back and forth. And, as we learned from the doctor, it's, Jonathan is weakening. It's just the natural progression of things.
It's a really innovative idea.
Yeah, especially knowing that the one that's winning is the one that at that point doesn't have the will to go on, is ready to give up. Yep. And it's like, yes.
Super clever. And a great misdirection by the story writer too. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, it got to a point where I thought this, again, we're now in a different phase of the story of the conflict between the two, and the one that's losing out, how to come to terms with, well, I'm losing, but he has a life worth living. He's got this career, and if we get this whole setup with his career as an architect that they want him full time and he can't, and John is the barrier to that. And now Jonathan is losing out, but he's the one that has, something to be working towards, whereas John has given up on life. And I thought that's not where I expected this movie to go from the beginning. I was expecting more of the mystery thriller of what's the one brother doing, and can we solve this mystery and puzzle, whereas now it's getting to a more direct, commentary perhaps on, purposefulness and meaningfulness in life, and what is a life worth living, and all of that. And do we appreciate the things we have when, John's going to get the body, but is he going to waste his life? Because we see the bad decisions that he's making versus Jonathan, who's got the, more idealized life of a solid career, and, he's responsible and orderly. He's a upstanding adult, but he's losing out on that. And then we get that pushing back and forth. And at one point, finally, Jonathan wakes up in the back of a taxi cab.
And that brings us to a whole different part of it, because throughout the movie, we've been using the interaction of the two brothers on video to have their communication with each other. And now they get a surrogate for the video, and that's the cab driver. And the next, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes, it's really sort of it almost feels like the denouement, right? It's the calming end of this film, where the cab driver, every time Jonathan wakes up, he says, "I'm supposed to tell you XYZ. I'm supposed to tell you XYZ."
Yes.
And it this section then allows us to drift with the two brothers and lose the brother we've been following the whole time, and then has a beautifully graceful shift to flipping around. And they use the camera to do it. They use the blackouts that we've been talking about from the climax scenes. And then eventually we flip around to the other side and we see our same character, same actor, but now embodying John and having the cab driver for the first time talking to John.
Yes.
In our perspective, opposite of what we've been experiencing with Jonathan the entire movie. It's a really smart turn and a really clever idea.
It takes us to the place that, when I saw the trailer, how are they going to end this? How do you know from the beginning you're not going to be able to have both brothers survive? So how do you get to that point? How do you get to that in a rewarding way? And this gives us a more open ending, and it ends on a question that is unanswered. And I was wondering how you felt about that, because we've seen throughout just bits and clips of Jonathan, his routine, listening to, learning French. He's, taking French lessons, on a podcast or, whatever. He's listening to these lessons. And at the end, we've got the taxi driver listening to, whatever it's in French. John asks him to turn it up, and the driver asks him, "Oh, do you speak French?" And he doesn't answer.
And I think it's a great ending. I think it leaves us wondering. I think it speaks to the science fiction aspect that this might not be about two personalities, that it may be about one or two consciousnesses, I should say. They're not just two personalities, that they could be one. Ultimately, they become one person, and that the experiences of the body, the experiences of the spirit, the experiences of the consciousness is transferable. And I think that's really interesting. And it doesn't explain it. It doesn't say that that's what's happening, but
Right.
It asks the question.
Yes.
And it leaves it out there. And that's the kind of stuff that I really like, because it's the kind of stuff that's discussion fodder. And that's what this movie really becomes. It's the kind of movie that you'll go see or that you'll stream, sitting on your couch one night with someone that you care about. And after it, you'll be like, what do you think about that? And I think I really like that stuff. Even though it was a relatively small movie, I really like the fact that this is a conversation starter about something that's theoretical, but is a really interesting concept to consider.
Yes, it's exactly where I found myself. Initial viewing, about halfway through, I thought, I don't know what I think about this. By the time we get to the end, and it revealed itself to be something different, something more than I was anticipating early on in the film. And
well, one thing that I really didn't like is that Elena disappears.
Yes.
And I think in general, Elena, and this is Suki Waterhouse, I think she could have been used a whole lot more. And her character as a tool becomes really difficult to reconcile here, because if she does love John enough to then fall in love with Jonathan, knowing what she knows as a character, wouldn't she seek John out?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, and then when we get into third act and she's absent from the entire third act,
yeah,
she loves one of them or both of them, or she's bought into something, so she can't just go away, is how I feel about the character. And that's where I really get the feeling that this is kind of like a short film that's been made into a feature.
Yeah.
Because I need more from that character that we are told is in love with these guys.
Right.
So I don't know. And she was great. She was wonderful in the role. And I think that's an interesting and profound additional concept to whatever they're trying to tell us about the mind here.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's one of those pieces where you finish a film and you'll say, I still feel like there's something missing. It's rewarding telling the story it wants to tell, but that's where the writing, sort of the architecture is there of this was the purpose. This was what they were trying to tell. And they had characters that they needed or used to move that piece forward. But again, yes, Elena, as a human being in this story, I cannot imagine her just disappearing. We would have needed something, some big fight, something, or a conversation with the doctor, something to justify her just disappearance from the story altogether. And it's nothing that, to me, can't be left to at off screen of, a conversation she had with someone else that we're to try to guess together. I would want that emotional pivot for her character of having to leave this relationship, because clearly, yeah, she's connected with both of them. It's something that as you discuss and, have a conversation with this film and start to piece it, pull it apart, exploring it, it's these sort of cracks in the story that reveal why this film probably isn't going to be, a classic you're going to come back to time and time again. But it does, I think it serves its purpose as getting people to talk about or think about these things as we're discussing, tonight. It's more than just...
It's a great stream view.
Yes.
It's a great thing to catch on Netflix.
Yes.
I think lots of people are going to like it.
Yes. This was one that actually I had picked as a trailer, and then I was thinking about what's worth talking to, and I was reminded of this one by my oldest daughter, who had watched it on Netflix probably late April, early May, as she was studying for finals at the end of her first year of college. And she said, "You need to check this out." And I said, "Oh, that was a trailer rewind pick." She's like, "Oh yeah, you guys should do that on the show." And I'm like, "Great." And she said it's not a great film, but it was worth watching, and she really enjoyed watching it. And it's one that, again, I think that's the one thing to set people up with of it's going to give you some things to think about and talk about. So watch it with somebody or make it an appointment to, like, we're both going to watch this and meet, for coffee and talk about it. But
the movie it reminded me of the most, I mean, I mentioned Black Mirror a lot here, which is, the TV show, but the movie it reminded me the most of was Her.
Oh, okay.
Which it is not really the same, but you have this concept of a disembodied major character.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you get in this story too. And I think people who are fans of that kind of storytelling, which is telling you about an intimate relationship that's around not something you're going to be able to witness on screen, or something in the Black Mirror vein where you feel this intense science fiction, intense emotion attached to science fiction. I think that's the kind of thing that you will like if you like it, or you will like this movie if you like that kind of thing.
Yeah, this could... it didn't occur to me to think of Black Mirror, when watching this or afterwards. But now that you mentioned it, it does have that feel of, if this story were tightened up a bit, this could have been a Black Mirror episode, because of just that exploration of different personalities in a body, the different, people we can be around different groups of people.
Right.
Yeah. So it has that potential.
Well, and clocking in at 95 minutes, there's not a whole lot you have to cut to make it a Black Mirror.
Well, that's
episode.
true. That's true. But is there a specific, type of person? I guess we've talked about the type of genres it is. And I think that's really the way to sort of direct people towards this. If you like this type of thing versus, this is for a younger audience, an older audience. Clearly, a college student enjoys it. We, much past our college years, enjoying this. But I think it's people that like a certain type of film are going to be drawn to a story like this. It's going to take some patience, because it does take its time, and it's storytelling, because it is character focused. But I think the pacing works well enough to keep you moving along. There wasn't a point where I felt like, we're spending too much time here, because it does shift from the different phases we sort of walked ourselves through of just, the initial introduction to the guys, and then the mystery, and then the relationship, and then the conflict between the two. And it transitions itself between those and keeps, I think, an appropriate amount of time in each. And then the sequence is sort of woven in between with the doctor as needed. It does everything it needs to do. There's something that prevents it from just being, wow, that great 4-star movie that I would, be really excited to be telling people about. But I think it was a rewarding watch for me.
Yep. Yeah. It's not, for me, it's right in the middle. Yeah. It's a 2.5 for me, because I think it's really innovative, and it's a right. So I think it's a good movie. But when we get to Flickchart, it shows up as really kind of low for me, because it's such a small film, and I missed some things in it. So it actually comes up lower than I would have expected.
It ended up low for me as well. And because it just kept coming against things. And I thought, well, yeah, that's, and I there's two factors that I always consider when making that decision of, well, is this film just a joy to watch, more so than this one? Or sometimes, is this really have something profound to say? And so this one struggled in both those areas because it's not one that I look forward to like as an enjoyable watch. It's not something I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to watch Jonathan again. But it's also not one that really probes and asks really big questions or is a true, mind bender where you're like, wow, this is, giving me something to think about and analyze. It just touches in those areas and that just keeps it from.
Yeah, you end up having to do that mental work on your own. Where did it end up on your foot?
So it ended up at 346. Which is, lower half out of 394. And it's in between two it's in an odd place. So it's just below the Amy Schumer comedy Trainwreck. And then it's just above a movie that I discovered on Netflix called ARQ, which is a little time. It was like something that was either a Netflix original or something they just picked up that, didn't get any distribution. And it's a small little time travel, post-apocalyptic film. It's all set in a house and it's got time loops going on. So if you like that type of thing, where you've got time loops and, trying to escape from a time loop and figuring out exactly what's going on, it's that type of film. And so Jonathan feels like a good companion piece for that because Ark didn't do anything just earth-shattering, but it did some interesting things and I enjoyed watching it. It's not one I'm going to go back and watch again. And so I think it's a good place for it. Yeah. But yeah,
a similar thing happened to me, and it's low. It's 147 out of 205. Okay. But it's right between two Trailer Rewind movies. So it's right below Odd Thomas.
Okay.
Which I think is a great movie. Yeah. And it's really fun, but it also feels small. It feels contained. And then it's right above Don't Think Twice, which I think another relatively small movie, and contained. I think Jonathan has a little bit more of a clever idea behind it. So that's why I have it over that. I think the interesting thing is that both Odd Thomas, Don't Think Twice, and Jonathan are all 95 minutes or less. So that tells you something too about that concept of a big, well fleshed out movie versus something that's going to be a nice, quick, digestible thing on streaming services. So that's where it's on my.
And you said that it puts you at about 2.5 stars.
I say 2.5 and a like. I could give it a 3, but I don't think it really compares with the 3-star movies that I've rated that way. So I'm just going to say it's right in the middle, but I definitely give it a like.
Yes, and that's about where I put it because for 3 stars, that's something that I want to say I enjoy it. I'm probably going to watch again. Whereas 2.5 stars, I'm getting to the point of, well, there's some flaws, or just I'm feeling sort of indifferent about watching again. I enjoyed it, but don't really need to see it again. So that's So I think we're pretty much in about the same place with this one. Recommend checking it out if it's this type of thing, but don't expect anything earth shattering. But if you're flipping through Netflix and it comes across, and you're in the mood for something like that, it's short. Yet entertaining and give you, a thought-provoking, conversation piece. This is definitely the film to check out.
Yep. Interesting conversation piece.
All right. Well, for all our listeners out there, if you haven't already, please head over to iTunes and give us a rating and review. It helps other film fans discover us. And if you choose to support us on Patreon, you're joining a great community of film lovers, some that are really into film as art and some that just really enjoy entertaining movies. We'd love to have you join our community. Right now, there's a huge debate going on about raunchy comedies. This just happened tonight because we've been talking about Booksmart, and a couple of people said, oh, I don't like those raunchy teen comedies. And so now there's discussion about whether it's really a raunchy teen comedy or not and what makes it.
What's the definition of raunchy?
Exactly. And so I know Andy has put a poll up on Facebook. There's ongoing discussion back and forth about just teen comedies and John Hughes and everything. And it all started because a few of us talked about Booksmart and had a great time seeing it, and other people are saying that's not my type of film. And it's conversations like these that happen all the time, just seemingly out of nowhere. Suddenly there's a huge, lively, spirited debate going on about films that people enjoy and why they enjoy them. Well, So there we are. That's what's going on Discord right now. Well,
Good stuff.
Want to send out some special thanks to Pete Wright for taking time to edit this together. We sit down, we record this, then we hand it off to Pete. He always makes it sound good and cuts out all the awkward pauses and stumbles that we have. So thank you, Pete, for doing that. JJ, it's been a pleasure talking with you about Jonathan tonight.
Thanks. We'll talk to you on the next one.
Hondo.